Hey, TCS TV viewers, it's Dave and Evelyn from the Camera Store. Tonight, we are talking about the A9 III, a tech talk with sports photographer Nick Didlick.
The Sony A9 III, Dave. And of course, the best part of live streaming is being able to interact with all of you. So please be sure to ask questions. This is your opportunity for us to ask Nick Didlick questions about anything that has to do with the Sony A9 III, sports photography. We'll probably get into some other products as well.
But speaking of going live, we love going live. We have TCS TV Live Dream Team working behind the scenes here. Tonight we have Drew and
Gary?
Gary. Yeah, Drew and Gary. Sorry. Yeah, that was a joke. It was a joke.
Is it because I'm not here enough anymore?
Yeah. I also want to mention that we from Sony Pro Service with us tonight. He's from the Canadian side, so we wanted to bring another Canadian on board with us so that we could chat about all things technical. So if you have questions about Sony Pro Services, he's going to help us come up with some really good zingers for Nick as well. We'll get into the nitty gritty. So welcome, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, both these guys are like wealths of information when it comes to Sony. So
lots.
Yeah, it's really in-depth tech talk. I think
I also want to mention that, of course, Sony helped us bring this event together, helped us connect with Nick Didlick, and they have put together some special deals. So if you are local and you're in Calgary, you have to know that we're doing our huge used gear buying event, and Sony has put together some amazing offers. So not only can you get a 25% bonus credit, but you can stack this with their existing Get Paid to Trade In program. So it's pretty crazy. I saw people today that were like walking home with a lot of credit, even if you just trade in, like, say, an old little DSLR, clean out your closet, clean out your uncle's closet, bring all this
Make sure they know, though.
Ask permission. But yeah, trade it in and you get some really good offers. So again, thanks to Sony for throwing that together for us for this time period. That goes until Saturday. And if you're not local, we also are going to be sending out an email with a special offer that if you registered for the event, you'll get it. If not, you want to be added to that list, just email me, evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and I will hook you up. But yeah.
All right. Yeah. If you don't know our guest already, Nick Didlick is a Vancouver, Canada-based commercial editorial photographer and digital imaging consultant.
Yeah, he's had an extensive career in photojournalism and photography that spanned over 4 decades, 2 continents, and over 60 countries, holding staff photographer positions at United Press Canada, Reuters, Vancouver Sun, and the National Post. And he's been twice nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and the National Newspaper Award-winning photographer. But we have had a lot of fun with Nick in the past. We were able to join him last time while he was physically at the Olympics. It was so cool to see him actually working in space. And today he's joining us from Vancouver. So welcome, Nick. Welcome, Patrick.
Glad you guys are here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Right.
today we are going to talk about this camera, the Sony A9 III, which we were very excited to hear about a few months ago. And this camera actually just started shipping. So it's kind of interesting. It's starting to get into the marketplace, into the hands of a lot of photographers. So we wanted to go through some concepts about it, maybe talk about things that people haven't heard about or thought about, and then just get your take on how this positions and hopefully help people make the right decisions. So first of all, Nick, what do you think has changed in photography, over your career the most? And like, what's happening right now? Like, what are sports photographers desiring when it comes to their gear?
Keep in mind, we're only here for an hour.
Yeah. And I have, I think, 48 years in photojournalism, sports photography currently. And I just racked up a couple more countries just in the last 3 months. So I continue to evolve. One of the things that the Alpha A9 III brought is the ability to enhance my career for the next 5 years. I was going to retire, and then all of a sudden Alpha 1 came along, and it gave me another burst of life. And now with the A9 III, with some of the features it has, I can use my old trick of old age and treachery to overcome youth and exuberance and use this camera to my advantage. So I've extended my career quite a bit with this.
I don't know what's bigger news, global shutter or Nick thinking of retiring.
Yeah. I picked a date. I have a date now in my mind. I just came up with a 5-week road trip through Asia and then straight to the Super Bowl and then straight home to get sick for a week. So, retiring. I picked a date. That's
busy time.
When it comes to sports photography, one of the things that happens is photographers know their brand really well. So Nikon shooters, Canon shooters, and Sony shooters, but Nikon and Canon shooters especially, they know their brand really well. They just have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world in cameras and camera design. And so what we're seeing now is that people are starting to catch on that, since 2017 with the A9 launch and then through the A9 II and into Alpha 1, they're being taken up a notice. For instance, at this year's Super Bowl, we had about 35% of users in the field shooting Sony. From, a few short years ago, nobody was doing it. And so, and Sony's just on an absolute tear with technology right now. And when just trying to keep pace with not only cameras, but the new transmitter they announced today, the apps that they have, they're going at it, like at light speed, and there's no stopping them.
All right. Now, global shutter. This is the thing that has changed, that could change how cameras actually operate.
Right.
But so what? Why should people care about global shutter? What is it actually going to achieve from a sports photographer perspective?
And one of the things that happened, and I think we're talking about this just before we went on air, is that, I've been in photography for a long time. I went from film to digital photography. And that was a huge shift. And then, that was DSLRs, and we had to endure, since 1994, all the problems of that. And, it finally got into mirrorless photography. And that was another huge shift. So we went from a completely mechanical camera to a mechanical electronic camera to an almost completely electronic camera. And, this is the next big shift in photography. I mean, this was the holy grail to get the global shutter. And for people that didn't know, we were struggling for a long time with rolling shutter. That's the first thing that happens. And that, a shutter, normally it would scan. And so you'd see banding and, all sorts of other defects because it was scanning. Well, now with global shutter, we capture the entire frame all at once and dump those pixels down. And so we no longer have rolling shutters. So, if you shot a less expensive camera, you might see a basketball player running down the court, and one of his legs looked like elongated, or basketballs look like eggshells and things like that. That's all gone because now we're actually capturing the same amount of data in a split second and dumping that data to the chip at an extremely fast rate, which is just mind blowing when you start to think of it. That's the first thing that global shutter can bring to sports photographers. The second thing is flash photography. Anybody does flash. And as a sports photographer, I have to shoot flash. Now, if you're shooting NBA or, NHL games, there's team sports photographers have strobes put in the ceiling. And that's not cheap. And it gives you, for them, they're ecstatic because I'm capturing the image just like that. I can now sync my strobes at any shutter speed up to 1/80,000th of a second. So what does that mean? Well, we've been thinking for a long time at basketball games at 1/250th or 1/500th of a second flash sync, and we could see things like feet. You see movement still in feet, shoelaces, other things that were still moving in the picture because it wasn't quite fast enough. Now at 1/80,000th of a second, it like everything is packed razor sharp, and that's huge. But for me, I have to do trophy presentations. And, you go outside in bright sun and it's just ugly, right? Everything's just ugly. And now I can go out and shoot 1/4000th of a second, flash it, bang. And I don't no longer have to worry about it. I can stick a flash, my Sony flash, on my Sony camera, and I can just pick it up and shoot. I don't have to go, I got to dial down my shutter speed, or it didn't sync, or this had, or this, I just put it on and go. So I can shoot flash at any shutter speed, which is, to me, is really, really exciting because, I was at the Grand Prix in Vegas and I was shooting the A9 III and I was shooting with my 50 millimeter 1.2 flash at 1/8000th of a second. So I'm getting a completely different look than the other photographers. And so that is pretty cool as well. And then we get the other cool things that are inside that camera. 120 frames per second, pre-capture. Like, other camera manufacturers have pre-capture, but this is pre-capture, RAW plus JPEG, 120 frames a second. I can go back in time, and I can be tracking an eyeball while I'm doing it. Yeah. Like it's, this is why it's extending my career. I don't have to, I just got to set the camera up, wait for the moment, bang, got it. I don't have to worry about it.
Well, in a few minutes, I think it'd be great if we could look at a couple of your images that you photographed using the pre-capture feature. But before we get to that, question maybe from the Sony side of things, Patrick, Why now? Like, what did Sony have to overcome in order to be able to put in a global shutter?
Well, I think Nick could probably help me with this, but there's definitely a lot of technological hurdles, even to switch. Like when digital cameras first came out, Sony was a big manufacturer of CCDs. To move to CMOS wasn't even an easy feat. There was a lot of technological hurdles to overcome in order to get ready for the consumer market. And the same thing with the global shutters. There's a lot of things that our engineers had to overcome in order to have this great technology in a consumer level camera. I personally never thought it would be possible, but here I am proven wrong again with another amazing Sony launch.
Such a pessimist. Such a pessimist.
I didn't miss that.
If anybody was going to do it, it was going to be Sony. I mean, they invested $2 billion in sensors 4 or 5 years ago. And it's not just camera sensors. That's not what they invested in.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we can come out with it is Sony's the #1 manufacturers of sensors in the world in general.
Right.
When you sell a lot, you got a lot of income, you got a lot more money to put into research and development. It's just like a snowball. It's the more you sell, the better you get, the more you sell. So we can't help but be #1 in that case, right?
Yeah, just pushing that technology. But yeah, Nick, could you show us your screen and can we take a look at a few images? I know you were just at the Super Bowl, and then before that you were photographing, what were we looking at? NASCAR stuff?
Formula One?
Oh, yeah.
Formula?
Hey, you don't want to get those two crowds
No.
mixed up.
Let me just see if this works. You should be seeing a screen. It's going to do this again. Let's go home. I'm on my Instagram page. So I have 2 Instagram feeds. One is A Sports Pro, and I be able to move this screen to the left. That's all I want to do. And so you can see a whole bunch of different images when you look through here. One of the standard ones is this picture. I think if I click it, it should go large. There it goes. And a bullet ejecting out. And, you had to time that before. Even at 30 frames a second, you had to time it. At 120 frames, you get the bullet going up, over here. You have like 60 frames to choose from to get to that, to that one moment. This one was done at 120 frames a second, which was overkill. I could have shot it at 30 frames. They're not moving that fast. And so when I shot 120 frames, I basically had to delete 90 to get down to these 30 and then delete another 10, I think, or whatever it was, the final selection of multiple exposure. That's just a picture. This is from a blog about robotic cameras. This is an Alpha 1 at the Super Bowl. We had to go in a week early to set things up. What else did I have in here? We were talking about pre-capture.
Yeah.
And did you want to get into pre-capture now or later?
Let's do it.
Let's just go.
Okay. So, the camera has this ability to shoot 120 frames. You can select it down. You don't have to shoot 120 frames per second, but you have 120 frames. Now, with RAW plus JPEG, you have about 1.6 seconds at 120 frames before you run into that data. It's 6 gigs of data per second. If you look at it, 1.6 seconds, 6 gigs of data. So what pre-capture does, I can set that camera up so that when I'm holding down my AF button, front or back, doesn't matter, holding down the AF button, the camera starts shooting pictures and buffering. And so I have the ability to say, okay, go back for half a second when I push the button. So the camera's buffering. I push the button, it goes back half a second, starts recording that image from a half second in history ago from when I pushed it, all the way through and goes a second forward. And you can go back for a full second, but that only gives you a half second in front. So when you have cars throwing out sparks, usually by the time you see the spark and your brain to finger, push the shutter button, there's a little less than half a second. So it goes back and it gets what you physically saw in that instant. And one of the things it does is it makes it dead easy to do things like this. A receiver running down full speed, your eye tracking him at 120 frames a second. When the ball's about to come if you cover football enough, and you can see that ball just coming down and into his finger. And so you can go back and forth almost like a live video and pick your frame and move that frame out. And one of the beauties of this is that it's not 120 frames all laid out where you have to go bang or anything. You have chunks. And so you can go, okay, this was the sequence I want. Push that button. It opens up that sequence. And then you can go back and forth in that sequence and choose those moments in time. And this is one of the reasons why I say it's actually extending my career, because I can use this feature. As I get older, my timing may not be as good, and I can still get the kinds of pictures that I used to see all the time. And so, we're seeing this kinds of things done. And, it's not for everybody. I always tell people that, if you were like me, you grew up with film, you 36 frames and you were done, this is perfect for people like us, because we know when that moment's coming, as opposed to young people that may not have as much experience covering NFL at a high level. They don't know when that moment's going to happen. So they're shooting this and shooting that and shooting the other thing. I just know when that moment's coming, bang, shoot a second or two, and I'll have frames where the football's just off the fingers, things like this, right? So it allows you to do different kinds of things. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else in that sequence, but I don't think there is.
I'm also amazed that not only does it do that pre-capture and shoot at 120 frames per second, but it also focuses during that time on every photo. And also, it's at full resolution, whether shooting RAW or JPEG or RAW plus JPEG.
Yeah, it's the processing power in that camera, and it's one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier with this. So anyway, yeah, that's about pre-capture, 120 frames a second. I'm really excited to be using this coming up to the next Olympics. When you think about sports like boxing, and not so much Olympic boxing, but regular boxing and other things, we used to have to try to time our shutter by watching the bicep. And when the bicep flexed, that's when you start pushing your shutter, because by the time you saw that fist was already in contact with the face. Well, that won't matter with pre-capture. Go back half a second, see the bicep. You're going to have it all right there to edit. And so this becomes one of the things that makes me pretty excited about the Alpha 1 for photographers.
Awesome. Well, yeah, if you want to stop sharing your screen there, Nick, so we can see you. There you are.
I mean, we're seeing cameras over time get faster and faster. We're already seeing multiple cameras in the market now shoot 30 frames per second. That's stepping up to that next level, and especially with pre-capture, it makes capturing those incredibly fleeting moments that much easier. I don't want to call it cheating, but it feels so much easier, so much easier to capture these moments that it used to be more like spray and pray at times, and other times it's just luck.
So now I know that, you think it's been cheating since you were in the darkroom. Everything else is cheating from that. Is that how you look at technology? No. But it's also not just about sports. When you think about wildlife photography, I do a lot of stuff with bears, not so much with birds, but with bears. And the ability to watch a bird about to launch into flight, you can go pre-capture and see it go back to where you missed the actual launch, or things like, here in Vancouver, we have like a million eagles just south of me here from downtown Vancouver, and they fight in the spring. And so talons out, they're approaching, they're waiting, and then all of a sudden they're on each other. You'll get pictures that we haven't seen before. And I think that's one of the exciting things about this, is the ability to see things that we really haven't seen before or saw on occasion. Now we're going to see it routinely.
Now, when it comes to actually choosing a camera right now, I mean, obviously there's a lot of options. With Sony in particular, there are a lot of options, a lot of good ones.
Yeah.
But how do you go about choosing which camera is going to be the better option? And is there different ways that you approach and set up the cameras? Say if we're comparing the Alpha 1 versus A9 III versus even A9 II.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on how people in the different product lines don't know what their others are doing, but even in the product line, they don't know the other cameras in their product line. So Sony has, a number of active product lines, and while we're converging with still and video, we're still not there with a really great video camera and a really great still imaging camera. We're very close to that. So, when I choose a tool, the first thing I have to decide is it going to be a video or is it going to be still? Okay, it's going to be still. Then, the next thing is, well, what is the still image? So that I'm going to choose a camera with the megapixels I'm going to need for the job. If it's going to be a big mural with, maybe advertising in some place I have control, I'm going to shoot probably an A7R5, for instance. But when it comes to sports, I have, 3 cameras, an A9 II, an A9 III now, and an Alpha 1. And, even with inside those 3 tools, they tend to do better at certain things. And, we've heard, a lot about the high ISO performance and all these other things. Well, this happens in all cameras, so you got to pick the camera for the particular job. And this conversation comes up a lot with sports photographers that are shooting Sony that I know.
Yeah.
Currently, I'll still use I'll use A9 IIIs and Alpha 1s. There's no two ways about it, because in sports, until we get global shutter in Alpha 1, which hopefully will come next week. Just kidding. It's probably years away. When you think of how long it takes these things. Patrick,
Not to
Patrick
spark
could
the
probably tell
rumor
us.
mill or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you were saying that the development for A9 III, that we've been developing it for 3 years, right?
Yeah, about 3 years. They knew they could do it. It's just a matter of building it all into the actual final camera that we get into our hands, and the development, because it's not just about the sensor and moving pixels. There's just a whole bunch of other stuff that has to go on that camera, including lens technology. So going back to choices, it's going to, for me, I'm going to have an Alpha 1 and an A9 III. There's no two ways about it. I'm going to use those 2 tools depending on what I'm doing. Why would I use an Alpha 1? Well, the Alpha 1 is a higher megapixel camera. I'm able to crop in tighter on certain things. So if I'm stuck on one end of the field and I'm photographing the other end of a soccer pitch, for instance, an Alpha 1 is a perfect choice because I can actually, get a bigger crop from that picture. And the ISO performance of the Alpha 1 and the A9 III for my taste is about the same. The A9 II, to my taste, still has a little bit better, higher ISO performance. So I'm going to use A9 IIs for remotes in dark places. I'm going to use it in places that I don't have another camera to put in there, and so I can actually make some sort of choices. So I have no idea what that sum is. It's just like if I do this or this,
I was
I end
saying, was
up
that
with a balloon.
It's like,
I do something like this, and I'll go.
I thought maybe it was
happens
Drew
on
and
Zoom.
Gary.
Funny.
They're like,
Messing
I
with
don't know.
No. Drew and Gary give me horns, right? Because I'm speaking at 120
So
frames
with those
a
cameras,
second,
with like the Alpha 1 and the A9 III, when it comes to autofocus, does one outperform the other marginally, or are they exactly the same when it comes to autofocus performance?
Okay, so this is the other thing that people are going to have to get used to, is that we have an A9 II and an Alpha 1 that are sports cars. You can go down to your local lot and buy yourself a nice sports car, and away you go. I'm going to go down there and I'm going to buy a Grand Prix car, and that's what an A9 III is. It's going super fast. And so the settings and other things that you're going to do with an A9 III, you're going to set it up slightly different than you would an A9 II or an Alpha 1. Autofocus is one of those types of things. In sports photography, we always set it to 4 for our focus change, speed. You can't do that in an Alpha 9 III because it's so fast now. It's actually 3 on that camera, and so there's going to be some differences that people are going to get used to. So it's just way speedier is one of the biggest things. The other thing that people are going to have to get used to is firmware. I know it's back in the old DSLR days, like we rarely got firmware updates. Well, now we have to keep on top of firmware, because not only in the camera with extra settings, new menu things coming alive for us, but also with the lenses. That camera was developed. We put out the 2470 GM2 and the 7200 GM2. They came out. Well, then this new camera comes out, and those lenses don't know this new camera exists, and that this new camera is super fast. So we have to give it new firmware so it can keep up to the newest cameras, and that's one of the beauties about firmware. So I'm sure Patrick has a long list of firmware updates that he could probably provide with links to the different lenses that you may own. It's not that it won't harm anything. It just won't perform at its top speeds or its best way. So you're not going to harm anything by using it. It's just not getting the full power of that camera without that. And the same goes for flash. There's only 2 flashes that can be firmware updated so they can work with this new camera at the shutter speed of 1/80,000th of a second, for instance.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned firmware on your lenses. People always think about the body's getting firmware updates, but even our own IT guy, Gary, back there, he's like, what? I'm way behind on my firmware on half my lenses.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch in December on lenses because of the launch. So yeah, we'll make sure we get Gary up to date there.
And then when somebody buys a brand new lens, they can have Gary update it for them in the store.
Yeah.
Excellent. Of course, they can always come to us. I'll help out. We have a question here from Clayton in the chat. This kind of touches on what we were discussing a little bit earlier, but there's some rumblings of noise being significant with the new global shutter. How is unprocessed raw noise and higher ISO compared to, say, the first generation A9, knowing that the A9 II was cleaner?
The A9 is so long ago, I can't even remember what that was like. So for me, that's
Ancient.
Noise. Everybody has a different feeling about noise and the sensibility about how high is too high, and a lot of that depends on the work you do and the kind of images that you produce. And so, if all being equal, you have a great white balance, a great exposure, and we look through all these cameras, I have a very high, I don't like noise, to be seen if I can do it. My A9 III and my Alpha 1, I'm very happy at 3200. And that, people are going, oh, I shoot 6400, 12,800 all the time. Well, that's fine. But, I don't like that much noise in my pictures. Thank you. But the A9 II may be better if you have to go that really super high, in those kinds of shutter speeds with one of these cameras. So, sorry, I can't go back to the A9 because I sort of moved on from there. But yeah, you're going to be much happier with an A9 III than you would be with an Alpha 9.
Now, it came up, of course, with the launch that the base ISO on the A9 III was higher than other cameras. How often would a sports photographer, action photographer actually need to go to a lower base ISO?
Never. No. Base ISO, the only reason you'd want to lower your base ISO would be to get different apertures and shutter speeds that are available for that. If you had to do this with an A9 III, you just get an ND filter if that's what you needed to get done. I mean, we were doing this a lot before, just trying to get, those wide open apertures in bright sunlight, for instance, by putting an ND filter on some of these things. And I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen base ISOs at 250, 280. You think that's the optimal range for that sensor. What does it mean? Well, most of the stuff I shoot would be 400 ISO anyway. Mm-hmm. So that that's why it doesn't bother me. If I needed to go lower, I might choose a different camera or use a different way of looking at things.
All right. Carlos has a question. He goes, similar to my question. He says, the A1 versus the A9 III in autofocus performance, how does it feel switching between the A1 and the A9 III when shooting on the sidelines with both cameras? And also he's curious about the EVF differences between the two.
Yeah, I have no issue. I don't have any, and I know there's a couple caveats to this question. I don't have a problem with that. And, I don't turn my EVF up to its fastest refresh rate, mostly because of power consumption. And that, power consumption is probably more of an issue. And, if you have, there's a couple things in here, right? So some people have different kinds of eyesight issues, for instance. And so they may want to turn it up high because it feels better for them, or they may want to turn it down lower because it feels better for them. So I just use it on the standard settings out of the box. It's usually what I do. And I have about 60 frames per second. I can't remember the setting exactly, but it's about 60 frames per second. And that's fine for everything that I'm shooting, out of that part. The experience while shooting is not an issue so much. The Alpha 9 III is much better at focusing, let's put it that way. It's much quicker. It's quicker to find an eye. Some of the stuff that we've seen in the A7R4, the ability to have AI focus where it calculates where the arms and the legs are, and that it's able to lock onto, like football players with helmets on, with visors on, that you can't see the eyes. It knows where the eye is. It'll go right to there on the face mask and tell you where the eye is because it's calculated out for the head, the arms, the legs. It knows where that is. The player could actually put his head down and it'll be focused right there, right where the eye is, looking through the head. And so you get those kinds of eerie things happening now in the A9 III that you don't get in the Alpha 1, but you do see in some of the other Sony cameras. So that part is like just amazing, knowing that a football player could put his head down, lift his head up, and it's still on where the eye should be, which is huge.
Yeah, that's from our AI chip that's brand new in the A9 III. We include an AI chip, and we have what's called a human pose estimation. So based on where that person's arms and limbs and joints are, we know exactly where the head is, and from that we know exactly where the eye is. But same thing if that person that you're trying to take a picture of is small in your frame, it still recognize that person, and from farther away it will have face detection and eye detection.
Right.
So it makes your job as a photographer much easier if you're using that technology. It's kind of like a power tool versus a manual tool, right? These tools make your job easier, so you can get there faster, and you can have more of a guarantee of the quality and the results, right?
And actually, Patrick, that brings up a good point that we were talking about earlier, that this is the first camera at this pro level that makes use of that AI or machine learn based chip. So can you talk a little bit about what exactly that means and how that technology can continue to build and to improve?
Sure. So yeah, one of our first cameras that came out with that AI specific chip in our camera that handles just AI alone was our A7R V. So it's a very high resolution camera, but it's not a speedster. In our Sony lineup, we have two lines of cameras. The A9 series and A1 series are all about speed. So that's why someone like Nick would be using those for sports. But it's our very first sports camera with that AI chip. So it helps with a bunch of different things. So if you're shooting football, as Nick was talking about earlier, it knows that, hey, this is a human, based on, because a lot of times they're wearing a visor, maybe they have a shade on the top. A lot of cameras won't recognize that this is a face and where the eyes are, but seeing that there's arms and legs, it knows it's human and knows exactly where to focus to get the most important part of your picture in focus, which is the eyes, right? But we were talking about some other things too. You saw some of Nick's pictures earlier with the F1 car and the Indies. You can with that AI chip, it will be able to identify many different things, not just humans, but humans. It will be able to do planes, trains, and automobiles. You can set it so that it will automatically find and focus on that area. In the past, you needed to have 48 years of experience in order to know how to focus on that, when to get the perfect moment. But now someone who's newer in the industry can now have this technological assistance in order to get those great shots. But yeah, I was saying planes, trains, automobiles, people, animals, birds, and even insects is one of our first cameras now will be able to recognize an insect. So if you wanted to take a picture of a dragonfly in flight, which I've tried many times, it was part skill, part luck that you're able to get one in focus. The new cameras like the A9 III would make it extremely easy because it focuses faster. So here's one thing I want to clarify, and if you don't mind me taking 15 seconds to do so. The A7R V and the A9 can move a lens at the same speed. The difference is the frequency, how often it asks the lens to refocus. The A9 series and the A1 ask the lens to refocus much more often than an A7R V, for example. And that has partly to do with the sensors it uses, right? So if you're shooting something like a building, it's not really moving. You don't need it to move as frequently per second. A7R V would be perfect for that because it's the highest resolution camera. It's a great stills camera that way. But for sports or wildlife, like a bird, for example, it's moving so flittingly, like it's so random where it moves. You want something to be focusing constantly, like the frequency of the autofocus things, and to be able to recognize it with that AI makes your job much easier. It's a much more powerful tool now.
Yeah,
They're missing the one focus that I really want, which
What's
is
that?
ball AF. Follow the ball. So I want football, basketball, soccer, because we know that when the big collisions happen, it's usually around the ball. And so I always tell the Tokyo engineers, "Hey, where's my ball focus?" No,
I can't wait for that marketing campaign.
I mean, it begs the question. I mean, what's next? We have the pose autofocus. We have these cameras getting faster, and the AI is incredible. What's next on the horizon as far as the autofocus goes?
Face recognition. Just think about having a team where it can recognize all the players in the team, and then you can say, "Hey, I want you to focus on whoever, number 14 or whatever the name is, and it'll just follow his face. So right now we can do it with one person, and it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But you can imagine having the whole team, and you could switch from team guy to team guy to team guy, but also having all that captured and put in your metadata of your file. So while we're seeing AI being the bad word in the industry currently, we're going to see a lot more AI used to help photographers do their job.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've used this camera, had the pleasure to it, or the A7R5, and seen the autofocus is unbelievable. I mean, it's able to pick out a face from a tiny, tiny speck in the frame and follow it and track it. It's no longer where the person has to be sort of much more recognizable in the frame before it'll actually pick up the face. We were just playing around with it earlier, and it's following from miles away, it seems.
But we also have that extra small sensor now too. So before we had small, medium, and large. They go, try to pick a target. Now you have extra small, and so that when shooting in Washington D.C. and there's a lot of senators and stuff, and people are shooting through things and it's losing the eye. So now we can just tag that eye, and it won't matter what that person does. It's going to stay on his eye the whole time. And in sports, that becomes key, because the way that I shoot sports now is on extra small, looking at the player that I want to get, then touching the button, ace tag, and it's going to follow him. Doesn't matter where he goes. Pre-capture, shoot the pictures, and they're all going to be sharp. Which is like astounding. It's almost like playing laser tag now. Is how I try to describe it to photographers.
Well, one of our tech guys, Gary, has a question. Gary, can you wave to the camera? Say hello. Do you want to ask your question?
Can they hear me?
He's too embarrassed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
In here.
Oh, that works.
Yeah.
Oh.
Get a little closer comfort over there.
what? We're having technical difficulties with our technical crew. What's your question?
They look like a lovely couple.
The funny part is I'm out of focus.
Get them to.
Okay, what's your question?
Yeah, get them to tell you the question.
So there's another company that has specific setup. Each object now has they specifically said, so if you're tracking birds, don't put it on the auto, stick it in bird mode. Does it track better in that specific mode? So if like automobiles, you stick it.
Oh.
Or how good is the auto selection, I guess?
Yeah.
And when I shot eagles, it's with bird IAF on, it just goes straight to the eyeball of that bird, and it'll stick on that eyeball. Unless that bird does something really strange, it'll be eagles are a large bird. They're not insects, Patrick. So I don't know how your insect works, but I know with eagles, it's like stunning, and sticks on them.
So I think if you don't mind me taking that question too, is when you tell it specifically what you want to take a picture of, there's less chance it will focus on something else. So if you put on bird and there happened to be a squirrel in the same picture, it would choose the bird over the squirrel. So that's the advantage of switching from one type of subject to another.
And
So if you're doing a car,
auto subject select, when you've got a person, an insect, a horse, and a plane all in the same frame, is there hierarchy? Does it try and find? Does it go for the? Does it go for the human first?
Well, they're kind of different.
Yeah. You could just use that other brand. It'll grab something.
Yeah, there's the human one is actually the most advanced. You can see it because it's got the least amount of options, right? But then there would be an animal one, which will do birds and animals, and you can go specifically bird or animal, right? And then there's an insect one, and then a car one, and then a plane one, then a train one, right? So they're all.
I can speak for bird and animal, and it's because of the way the eyes are put. Like on a bird, they're more out to the sides, and an animal is more front facing, like humans. And so, with shooting grizzly bears, it's right on, animal, IAF, bang, it's on that eye. It's going to stay on that eye. And it's the same for at least the large birds that I have photographed. I haven't tried like a little tweety bird flying around or a hummingbird. But, those three I know specifically work extremely well.
So here's another thing that you asked about earlier about the AI chip. It comes into play again. So we're definitely talking about the eyes here. But what if you're trying to take a picture of a dog and it's not facing you? What does it do? So most of the other systems, the market doesn't know it's a dog. But with our AI system, we're able to recognize the shape of a dog and say, hey, this is a dog. So even if it doesn't see the eyes or the face, it'll still focus on the shape. And as soon as they turn the head and just a peek of their eye, you'll see it jump immediately to that glimpse of the pupil, and then you'll get the shot you want. So it's not just about the face and the eyes anymore. It's about the subject. So even if a bird's not facing you, it'll still be able to grab it, right?
I want to get into flash sync with global shutter, but before that, Nick, we had a good conversation in New York when the launch of this camera happened about some of the physical differences with this camera and how it's been really refined with professionals in mind, and just some of the functionality and how it's actually the ergonomics as well as the function buttons. Can you talk a little bit some of your favorites that they've upgraded?
One of the big things is they send me cameras to play with, and they send me buttons and all sorts of cool stuff. I don't know if you can see, but right here at the shutter button, without the grip on, you'll feel that it automatically feels a lot better. You know what we need? We actually need Sony AF focus. There it is. Now it's on the logo. That the camera will feel a lot better in your hand right here. And because there's been a lot of time spent on this. So the Alpha 9 III is slightly larger than an A9 II or an Alpha 1. And it's because of this part of the ergonomics. You'll also see that, on the top deck, if I block my eyes, that's where it'll go. On the top deck, the buttons are raised up. So now you can't miss. So in the sports photography, like I'm shooting, tagging, giving it voice file to it, and then on the back, sending FTP all the time. 1, 2, 3. So a lot of time was spent on this part of the camera. This part looks pretty much the same. The other parts look pretty much the same, but that part. They also have a new grip, so you can't put an A9 II or an Alpha 1 grip on this camera because this camera is slightly larger, and that brings to you a lot of benefits. In worlds now, we're shooting a lot more vertical, and that you'll find that. If you look on feeds, on different people's feeds, there's a lot more vertical video, vertical still pictures, and things like that because of the way people are consuming content, mostly on phones right now, depending on what you're looking at. So the grip here has mimicked everything that's on the top. So now you can hold that camera and still have complete control with all those buttons. If it's in focus, no, there they go. So now you have all those buttons that are all right the same place for you. At the same time. So those are really the two biggest improvements. That and then the back LCD, that the ability to pretty much put this, in any location that you could want, going back and forth and all over the place, that you can do all sorts of stuff with it, including turning it so that, you can have the cover so that you don't have your LCD sitting this way. You can actually turn it and put your LCD this way. And, for us, I believe that, this is going to go away. Eventually, we're not going to use this because people need to get used to doing everything through the viewfinder. It's a much better experience looking and working through the viewfinder. Unless, you're like me that has to wear glasses half the time. I put on my glasses, I look at my LCD, but it's a lot easier to go in through the UVF for those type of things. So those are really the major improvements. I mean, somebody's going to pick the camera up and say, oh, you got a new function button here. And what does that do? Well, I can set my camera to be 30 frames a second and just hold this button in, and it'll immediately go to 120 frames per second, right, as a function button. And, that's one of the great things about Sony, and it's also one of the hard things, is that we can make this camera buttons work whichever way you want. More and more function buttons can do more and more things in the future. So V1, when we first got it, could only do certain things. Now it does like a whole bunch of things, through those menus. So you can actually program the camera to be the way that you want it. And if you bought a second Alpha 9 III, you can take all those settings, save them to a memory card, and stick them in the new Alpha 9 III, as long as they're on the same version of firmware. So for everybody out there with an A9 II that says, oh, I'm just going to save my settings and put them on an Alpha 9 III, not going to work. You have to have the same camera on the same version of firmware for you to be able to save the settings back and forth. So those are the big improvements.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest. I mean, this is the best feeling Sony camera that you guys have done to date. And we've been through this big journey. And originally, the ergonomics of Sony cameras, the earlier generations of them, weren't really conducive for me. I wasn't really a huge fan, but they've gotten better and better and better. And this is by far the most comfortable and the best feeling camera out there.
Yeah. We have a comment or a question actually from Carlos. For those that have invested in previous models like the Alpha 1, could you see some features trickling down like pre-capture and autofocus improvement with firmware updates? Or are some of these things limited because of the processing power and the combination with global shutter?
You might see some AF improvements, but not IAF. And you pre-capture is definitely not coming. I mean, it just takes so much extra processing power that camera has. And when you look at the Alpha 1, we're getting, it's what, 2-3 years old about now. It's probably going to see 1 or maybe 2 more firmware upgrades, and then it'll be, that'll be it for that camera and those lenses. Other firmware upgrades will come for other devices, like the new Sony transmitter that was just announced today, or the ability to sync the cloud, those kinds of things. You'll see those come to the camera. It's still a fabulous camera, though. I can't see replacing one of my Alpha 1s for at least 2 more years, at least.
All right. Well, you talked about the power consumption of the EVF and not putting it up to 120 frames per second. When you're using the pre-capture, do you find that it draws a lot more battery power as well?
No, one of the things that happens with the camera, especially when you use the grip, is before we used to drain battery 1 and then drain battery 2. And what they've done now is they've put those 2 batteries as a combined power source. So now it drains both batteries at the same time going down. And I see way better battery performance than I've seen in any of the other cameras. I mean, somebody was saying, oh, yeah, you might see 10 or 20% difference. I actually see more than that. In regular outdoor conditions, I see much better battery performance. I would say it's more like 35 or 40% better than what I had previously for my shooting style. There's people that are heavy on the EVF, reviewing pictures all the time, doing all, well, of course, you're going to get less. 120 frame refresh rate, you're going to get less. But for my shooting style, I'm seeing much better battery performance.
Excellent.
Well, let's get into a big topic here, which is some of the advantages with global shutter in relation to flash photography. So Nick, from a sports photography perspective, what is the biggest improvement that you're seeing here from a practical use case?
Flash photography at any shutter speed. So, for everybody that's out there right now, you stick a flash on top of your camera, you're going to be limited at 250 a second or maybe 500 of a second, depending on your camera and APS-C mode and all these other little magic tricks. There is some tricks to force it to go a little faster than that. But by that, we're saying, on the average cameras that are out there, sure, there's other cameras with these shutters and things like that can go faster. But on the 3 major brands, you're stuck to like 500 if you're lucky. This gives you the ability to shoot flash at any shutter speed, 1/80,000th of a second, shutter speed on a flash. Now, sure, the depth, you're trying to get a flash that's going to give you that much power to be, that short duration is a bit difficult. So in the industry, for NBA photographers, for NHL photographers, for people that actually have strobes inside the stadiums, this is unbelievable for them because they've been stuck at these lower shutter speeds with flash, using the flash duration to actually freeze action. But even the flash duration won't freeze shoelaces or certain aspects of that image. Now at 80,000 of a second, they're just freezing everything and they don't have to worry about it. For me, in general sports photography, it's about fill flash and the ability to just stick a flash on and not have to worry about, oh, my shutter speed's this, I got to lower my ISO, I got to do this, I got to do that to get the magic of the flash to work. Now I just stick it on and play. I can stick it on at f1, look at it, it's 2,000th of a second at 1.2 or 1.4. Oh, that's great. It's going to look really cool now when they do fill flash, in certain situations, and especially bright outdoor sunny. And, I hadn't thought about this till, I can't remember what event I was at. I just stuck it on there. I didn't think about it and shot pictures and they're all fine, as opposed to, I've done something wrong here and I need to overcome that. So for flash photography, it's going to be, it's huge. And, we're going to have to see flashes develop for global shutter. That's what's coming. That's what has to come. Because there's only certain flashes currently that will do it for it. Also, in the camera, you can actually adjust it for your flash. So if you have a third-party flash, Braun or somebody else, you can actually adjust the bell curve to your flash. So the camera can adjust for your flash, and so that's really cool technology that they built in. I mean, Sony engineers are amazing, because you say, "Hey, give me so flash." Yeah, no problem. 80,000 seconds. Well, let's support all the flashes, and then they built this piece of technology into there, which also blew people's minds, right? Because it'll support pretty much any manufacturer's flash currently.
Yeah.
Maybe not optimally, but it'll get there.
Yeah, I mean,
The
we
bell
were playing
curve
around
he's
with it.
talking about is
Sorry, go
the
ahead.
bell curve he's talking about is the peak performance on each of the flashes. The timing's a little different, so you can adjust it so you get the peak performance out of anything. But if you don't mind me mentioning one more thing about the technical aspects from global shutter and flash, you'll find that the flashes that you use now, number one, they're going to be a lot more powerful than you're used to, because you're not going to, especially at the higher shutter speeds, because you're no longer going to have to put that flash in HSS mode, which really diminishes the power of the flash. Right, and also you'll see you'll be able to get your battery life will extend as well, because not only does it diminish how powerful a flash is, but also uses more power as well. So you'll get more shots, and your small flash you had is actually a lot more powerful than you thought it was. And the last thing I wanted to mention is kind of along the lines of to expand on what Nick was saying about shooting a basketball game. You're not going to get any of those weird flash effects anymore because of somebody else's flash, because someone else's flash in HSS mode. Global shutter to be able to take the picture all at once versus scanning a picture. So, for example, when the Raptors won the championship and then all the photographers are shooting, I've definitely seen pictures where there's one bright line there, and that's from somebody else's flash on HSS. That will be impossible now on
You see that. Yeah, you see that more on the red carpets. That's
right.
great. Yeah, red carpets. You always say, 50 photographers, all with flashes. And it used to be so cool, because I know some people won prizes because they only had a band of flash. That was somebody else's flash. I always say, hey, you should have given the photographer half your prize, right? For that. The other thing that happens, though, is banding. And some of the things that are around in the industry, especially with really poor LED lights, is that we've seen banding both on your subject and on your backgrounds. And that, it may be, an orange band through the backgrounds of your photos. And it's kind of, the average person doesn't see it. Me being a photographer does see it. And campaign trails are, things like that are really notorious for going to cheaply lit places. And they're lit for TV. And so sometimes you see this change in exposure or white balance throughout your subjects. That's also gone now with global shutter, because you're not scanning, you're capturing the entire image at the one time. And so the only times I've ever seen weirdness is I might see a slight density shift, and it depends on the LEDs. The NBA All-Star, game that was just happened, they have an LED floor basketball court, and we were all really worried about what that would look like with global shutter and stuff. And all the stars were shooting at 2,000 seconds. Nobody noticed at all, right? So that was good.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's been a big factor. A lot of people are shooting concerts and shooting under all kinds of mixed lighting. A lot of cameras have sort of flicker control, and they can control sort of a single light source flickering. But if you've got multiple light sources going that are all different hertz and different working, we often get banding with other cameras. There's just no way of fixing it except dropping your shutter speed to ridiculously low.
And there is flicker control in the Alpha 9 III, but most people don't realize to go there. They're so caught up in the moment that they don't even go there unless they're unless the president of the United States is going to be speaking for 40 minutes on stage, when they can go into that setting and change things around, to start that up. I mean, it's amazing. We're here talking to photographers who may never know what banding is, all about. For me, it's scoreboards in the background of my photograph. We deal with heavily lit LED boards, and like Max Verstappen standing in front of it, holding a trophy, and you'll see these vertical lines. Well, they'll be pretty much gone now. The times I've seen it now, it depends on the LED and the boards and stuff. But now I can see one roll of pixels flip off, because that one roll is here, and then it goes to here, and then it goes to here. The global shutter captures it right where it is at that moment. Where if you had a scanning shutter, it would run into it 50 times.
this is going to be a game changer for unit photographers shooting on movie sets, right? You'll be able to shoot at any shutter speed now. The A9 series was a game changer, and then the A1 you could shoot a little bit faster, up to 1/250th a second, not encounter that flicker, that banding. But with the A9 III, you can be able to shoot any speed on a movie set. So if you're shooting an action shot, you can be shooting at thousands of a second and capture that action and not worry about banding, right? I feel it's going to be a game changer for unit photographers as well.
That's great. We do want to touch on video in a little bit here, but before that, I want to know from the photography side if there's been anything, Nick, that has been like grinding your gears, that people have been talking about this camera that's been maybe like misunderstood, or that you think like people should really understand when they're considering this as a camera for sports and action photography.
That's a tough question. When I think of customers in Calgary, and it really depends. Take advantage of pre-capture. That would be number one. I mean, you're going to see different results right away, and I think that would be the number one thing. Would be pre-capture. Don't be afraid of 120 frames per second. Be very selective about when you shoot that 120 frames. The moment the bird launches, you got pre-capture 120 frames, you're going to just look like a hero, after that. In flash photography, make sure that your flash system is somewhat capable for the faster shutter speeds, if that's what you're going to, want to take advantage of. Those are probably the two biggest things. The autofocus is a no-brainer. I mean, the autofocus, everybody's getting better and better autofocus. I think most of them are trying to follow Sony into what they're putting into those cameras. Currently, I mean, it's always a leapfrog with technology. Mm-hmm. I believe this global shutter camera is 2 years ahead of everybody else. They won't have something like this for at least 2 years. So, enjoy it while you got it, and show it off to your other photographers when it comes up to it.
Nice.
I wish I was coming to Lake Louise to shoot alpine skiing. Like, this would have been just phenomenal in alpine skiing.
Oh, yeah.
Having the AF tracking of athletes coming over, where DSLR days you got 2, and with Sony, with the A9 II and the Alpha 1, I'm getting 23 to 30 frames sharp of a skier coming over a blind jump. Now I'm going to get 120 frames pre-capture. So I'm going to see the skier and get accurate pictures from before that. Because, when a skier comes over a blind jump, you see their head and you shoot. And by the time your first picture comes, it's there. Well, guess what? With pre-capture, I could go back before I saw them and capture that whole range of images. And so, I use that feature a lot there in Calgary.
Now, for the video people, with global shutter, what advantages do you see for people that are capturing video of action? I mean, no rolling shutter is a big deal, but what does that mean for videographers?
Fast action. Anything that's going to be fast action. Whether you're moving, so you got your camera and you're moving with a subject, and your background is not longer going to do this, right? So anything that's going to be fast action is going to be huge. And you can see on the web, some people have been doing tests with this camera. Either they're moving or their subject's moving, but particularly when they're moving the camera, that it's going to solve all those other issues that they were having. So, you could do a race car scene from car to car, for instance, and then have your background actually looking normal rather than kind of weird. Those kinds of situations.
Yeah, in New York, they had like a martial artist, and they were doing some different moves with I'm sorry, the terminology looks like stick things, but it was amazing. It looked almost cinematic because there was absolutely no bend to the motion. And I just thought, we've seen global shutter cameras in cinema and filmmaking before. Yeah. And so it had that look to it, but in something that's like a run and gun camera, like in this type of form factor. Yeah. And this is the first time that we've really seen it in this style.
Yeah, very different from the A9 II. Oh, sorry, you go ahead. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, so it's
No,
very
I mean,
different than the
yeah.
A9 too, because it's a very full-featured video camera as well as a photo camera. It'll have all the features that you expect in a high-end Sony video camera, 4K up to 120p, has all your S logs, S cinetone, everything, including all the new AI features that you've seen with our ZV series, including auto framing and all the other AI features on it, right? But yeah, that's one thing that I think videographers are going to. I mean, the audience is going to see very different. You're not going to see any of that bending. I think that you're talking about martial artists with that staff or that bow. You're not going to see any bends. With the fast pans, like when you're trying to capture someone running, you're panning with them, you're not going to get that distortion in the background. It's going to blow people's minds. This same way that HDR did when with TVs with HDR, everything's just going to look so much more realistic. Like for example, like a propeller, airplane propeller. We're used to making this weird S shape. It's now going to look the way that your eyes look because it's be able to capture everything at once, right? It's one of our first cameras now that be able to shoot at 4K 120 with no crop. But one thing that's really important too, because this is one of the fastest cameras we've made when it comes to focusing. If you're shooting at high frame rates like 4K 120, and the only reason why you're going to shoot at that speed is you can slow it down and play some slow-mo. If with our fast autofocusing, every frame is going to be in focus, so it's going to make your production that much more dramatic, right? Maybe something's running towards you or maybe away from you, and every single shot's going to follow it at a shallow depth of field, and every frame's going to be in focus. It's going to blow people's minds, right?
One of the things that we got used to is the human eye and the viewer's experience has just realized these as being the normal defect in a thing. So they don't even notice it. They don't notice banding in the background. They don't notice that the trees are slanted like this. And, Sony's now corrected all those things so it looks more like your human eye experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it elevates the quality of it again and just makes it look more cinematic because you were only able to see that in the past with $100,000 cameras.
Yeah, your reds and stuff, for sure.
Yeah.
Let's look at the creator shot.
Our video guy is here too. You look like you were going to say something.
Nothing crazy. Oh my gosh. When you wear headphones, remember to take off the headphones so you don't get echo back on. Yeah, talk to yourself. No, I was just gonna comment. Like, what impressed me even more than anything else was the fact that we were seeing the rolling shutter in log footage as well as all eye. Like, I was fully prepared for log footage to still have tearing and for the effect to be dampened fully because compression and the loss of individual frames to motion data and stuff like that. But no, even we shot some pop cans and you could see it when like when the little particles, when the droplets of liquid were flying through the air, you could see them arc so cleanly with like zero distortion on them. They look perfectly cylindrical all the way. And that's the part that impressed me most of all was like, again, I was fully expecting it all eye or nothing. Like you need all the exposure data in every frame for it to work. But no, it was working even in log as well. And so, just kudos on that at least.
Yeah, I think it hasn't necessarily been touted as really being an incredible video tool, but I think as it comes more in market and more people get their hands on it,
100%.
I think that word is going to get out and it's going to spread that it has some advantages that nothing else in this form factor again can really do.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's marketed towards sort of higher end sports photographers. It seems where it's like really pushing its market. But I think the more you use it, and if you're okay with the resolution, it's a much more versatile camera than you would expect.
That's a good point. I was curious about this with Nick. So there's a lot of talk about the sweet spot of resolution. Do you still think that 24 megapixels is the sweet spot for sports photographers? Is there really a desire or need when publishing work to go any higher?
It depends on who you work for. I mean, you look at the probably 80% of what's done now is consumed on the web. I mean, I know from newspapers I do consulting for that they're gearing up for the web. They still have a printed product, but really it's the web and what the web can bring to them. So when you talk about resolution, you think about what can resolution bring to us in sports photography. And, it's number one, it's the ability of the crop. one of the great things that we love about the Alpha One is a push button. We can push it, set up a button and go into Super 35 mode to give us that 1.5. So we don't have to carry a converter around for us. We have an instant converter going from down to 24 megapixels, right? So it just depends. There's no one answer. One of the things when I'm talking to engineers is that they're always looking for the normal. Oh, yeah, it's always this way. No, it's not. In sports photography, every event is different. We could go shoot the Stampeders, and every event is going to be different. They're playing a different team. It's a different time of day. It's a different piece of lighting. There's a different nuance to the game. We're going to approach every game slightly differently. And I wrote a blog on the Super Bowl. But we're already planning for the next Super Bowl. And it's because it's going to be a different stadium, like everything about it is different. And so we have to start a plan a year ahead about how we're going to cover that game. So you're asking me, what's the sweet spot? 50 megapixels. People hated that. People hated the idea. What? I don't want 50 megapixels. A9 III comes out. What do people say? Oh, it's only 24 megapixels. What the heck? Well, you can't please everybody. And, for me, I think having that beautiful 50 megapixel image gives me more choices about what I can do with that file. One of the things that we're seeing in the industry is some people want 16 by 9. Some people want verticals, so I can look at different kinds of outputs from that same picture. And so 50 megapixels is my sweet spot, but I love 24. I mean, 24 is probably a lot for this kind of stuff I need.
Yeah. Now, Nick, you mentioned that you're not coming to Lake Louise, which is too bad because we could have had a visit.
Yeah, because December last year they moved it to Mount St. Anne for short technical races rather than the event that we had there for 15 or 17 years. It was it was an amazing event.
What are you doing next with the A9 III? Are you allowed to share any cool projects?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm doing all sorts of stuff with the A9 III. Yeah, what am I doing next? So I'm working on an A9 III that's in a robotic camera that's battery operated using the new transmitter, so that I can take a camera and just put it over there, and it's just I can fire it with either RCT, a remote camera tool, or a Pocket Wizard, for instance, and it's going to beam the pictures back instantly. So the ability to take a camera and put it down anywhere and have it work remotely and remote control the camera. So a lot of what I do now is using the camera as a network attached device. One of the things, since I started doing some consulting for Sony back in the A9 days, was, hey, this has to be a network attached device. Like the ability to make it sync seamlessly. And that's what you're going to see coming. I mean, the cloud services that Sony's got now and the ability to sync camera to cloud, for instance, where you can shoot it instantly going to a cloud. I mean, right now we're using FTP, file transfer protocol, which is like the oldest thing. It was invented at the same time the internet was invented. So it's time to move on from that. And you've seen cloud services that, in the video feeds, in the video world for quite a while. I mean, 2 years ago, everybody was coming out with a cloud service. Well, now Sony's going to have that for their still photography. And then the apps that are in there. So remote cameras, mounted cameras in places that they've never been to before. Those kind of things. Having a small silent camera helps us with that. And so I've got, a WWE fight coming up where we can do cool stuff with the A9 III, and then I go to a UFC event, and then to the Final Four before going to the Olympics.
Interesting.
Excellent.
Now, so I mean, obviously, Global Shutter is a massive step up in technology. Should we expect Global Shutter making its way into more models in their lineup?
Sure. Why wouldn't you do it? Just think. Yeah, why not? Everybody else is going to be tasting Global Shutter now, right? Because of the kinds of it's changing the way that we photograph things, and so the others will have Global Shutter coming sometime, in their lifetime. Once people start to understand it, they're going to flock to it. Depending on file size is a big thing. I mean, you guys touched on some of the things: higher ISO, low native ISO. Flash, all those kind of things. When people start to understand what that tool can do, it's going to be a no-brainer.
Yeah. You mentioned, I think, to us earlier something about it kind of reminded you of when you were shooting with film. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and what kind of...
all, you think about film in that we didn't have banding, for instance.
Yeah.
And so when we got to digital photography, we still had a shutter going, but it never got banding. When we had banding, it was because our sensors were scanning like this. Now we're going back to global shutter, where it's kind of like film. We're grabbing the whole image at one time. Yeah, not technically, because there's a splice depending on what was happening with the shutter. So it feels more like film photography to me. When I'm out there shooting stuff, I'm not having to think of so many of the limitations. I mean, other than LED backgrounds, I'm not having to think about those kind of things. And LED backgrounds are simple now. I just shoot it and I go, oh, it's just a tiny little band. I'm not going to worry about this one. Or it has, depending on the refresh rate of the thing. But that's not the problem with the camera. That's the problem with the LED board, for instance. So it just feels, it's just like a lot more freedom. It's a really cool device to have in your hands. I mean, I think I'm probably, I was really excited about Alpha 9. I don't know if we talked about the Alpha 9 at the Alpha 9 launch and stuff. I was super excited about that camera, and I did a lot of really great things with that camera back in the Kentucky Derby and at Alpine Skiing in Lake Louise. I converted a lot of photographers. I mean, they're coming over and saying, what do you mean you got 29 frames sharp? And I show people 29 frames, and they're getting 2, So instantly they have to switch, right? Because their cameras aren't performing. This camera, I think, is going to be a little bit like that. Is that the experience, the user experience is just so much fun.
Well, awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you to you both for joining us tonight. Nick, for taking the time and talking about sports photography, showing us some examples.
And Patrick for staying up
and
so late.
Patrick for staying up late to join us as well. So it was great to hear your
Way past my
perspective.
bedtime.
Yeah.
But no, we really appreciate you guys.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the camera store too. I mean, every time I come in there and drop a few $100s, I come through town. Peter always tells me it's not enough.
We're always happy to have either one of you guys come to the store, Hero.
Yeah, and Peter's away right now, but when he gets back, you come to Calgary. We can hang out.
We'll get
and-
Peter to take us out for
we'll
lunch.
have lunch.
Yeah.
We'll have lunch. Yeah, we'll hit him up for lunch.
That sounds good.
Awesome. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and of course we want to thank our audience tonight, the TCS TV Live Dream team as well, for joining us and also throwing in their 2 cents. It's great to see Gary and Drew. And then we also just want to say to our audience tonight that if you are interested in looking at some Sony gear and you're local, we do have that used gear buying event with KH. They're in town until Saturday, so you can find out all the details at thecamerastore.com. It stacks with all of the rebates and all of the promos that are happening right now, so definitely check that out. And a big thanks to Sony Canada for supporting us with this show tonight. We really appreciate it, and we hope to catch you all again very soon.